Hey guys, once again, welcome back to the Go and Chess Trio. This is Anurag, and today we'll be having a look at another game at the Magnus Invitational Grand Final. This is the second game of the third match of the semi-final between Magnus and Ding. So Magnus was white here, and let's see what he did in this one. So the game started off with e4, c5. Ding playing the Sicilian, knight f3 and d6, d4, c into d4, knight into d4, knight f6, knight c3, a6. So we have the knight stuff on the board once again. We have been seeing this quite often by both these players and also in the other games also. We have seen this quite often in this entire Magnus Invitational Tour. Sicilian being played out way often than something boring like e4, e5. Not really boring, but a little less uneventful. We have seen more of this happen, especially amongst these elite players. So after a6 comes bishop e3. This time Magnus goes with bishop e3. We have seen a lot of implementation of rook g1 by Nepo, h3 played out, and we had seen f3 in the previous game by Ding against Magnus. But this time Magnus goes with bishop e3, e5, knight b3, bishop e6, queen d2. Not to be worrying about knight g4 here because white has bishop g5 in time. So this doesn't really help black in a lot of ways. Bishop g7, bishop e7, bishop into e7 and castle, and the d6 pawn is under a lot of pressure. If you think castle, you cannot really go ahead with queen into d6 because there's knight into f2 falling. So that would not be ideal, but you can definitely kick the knight away and then, a free pawn up for grabs here. That would not be ideal. So coming back to the variation, after queen d2, bishop e7, and f3. Now you have to take care of it because now if you castle, knight g4 will be pretty annoying. You just lose the e3 bishop, which is not something white wants to do this immediately. So after f3, h5 was played out. I mean, white was hinting at g4, so h5 takes care of it. And after this, bishop e2, nb d7, and now you'll see something a little bit unusual. Instead of castling immediately, white goes with knight d5, bishop d5, e d5, and black went with the very it looks like a passive move b6. Generally, we see a lot of rook c8, or if you play something like b5 here, though, white times just in time to play a4. Like you don't want to allow knight b6 like we saw earlier. b6 takes care of things with knight a5, but does leave a weak a6 pawn here, which can be exploited. So b6 was a little bit of a passive approach. After castling, white is happy to castle. Black played queen c7. King b1 is a very common move in Najdov. You just take care of the king. The king is safe on b1. You move it there. After that, b5. So eventually we see b5 coming on the board. The only way that black can probably create some play and expand. Maybe planning something like knight b6, knight c4 also. Attacking the d5 pawn, maybe c4. These are some of the ideas that black has in mind. And white immediately pounces on that square a5. Knight c6, you see it, you grab it. And knight a5 played on the board. It was met with knight b6, again sticking to his plan of either capturing the squares. And again, a very nice decision here by white. d5 pawn is falling. Sometimes you have to give up a bishop for that. And white takes the bishop knight on b6. The point is he doesn't want to spoil his chances of going with something like knight c6. That is a very strong square. You don't want to spoil it there because the knight is generating some counterplay. Your bishop is a good bishop, but I think the knight was being much better there. The black knight was doing a much better job. So white captures it. Knight c6 on the board. Bishop d8. Well, black is maybe planning to castle here soon. So takes care of the bishop first. And maybe later, you do see black trying to improve the bishop on b6 and trying to get it back into the game. So this is a good way to do it. Rather than just passively defend like this and castle, black does a much better job of thinking ahead. Maybe he can get the bishop into the game this way. So white plays c4 here, which was a little bit, I was following this game and I was a little bit surprised by c4 here. I was expecting something where white will prepare g4 or go with g4 directly in this position. I felt like this would have been slightly better, but that is my opinion. Because after this, I'm sure that the king is not going to be safe on that side. It is very risky for white black to castle on the king side too. White has some strong attacking possibilities ensuing here. So I was more in favor of g4, but Magnus somehow surprised us with c4. Surprised me with c4, unless some of the people were really guessing this move. But I get his point. The point is after b into c4, black cannot really utilize his rook on b8. The c6 knight is covering that square. So black castled, white played rook e1. After this, he went with g4 and suddenly started opening up. At the moment, we can see that Magnus has a lot of time here. He can definitely expand in different ways. So let's see what happened in the game, because after g4, black is definitely going to face some problems. Now, at first glance, when you see your king there, when you see an attack ensuing, your first instinct is to always play something like h4 here. You block it, you don't want to open up more than already it is. But the problem with h4 is, white just like consolidates with g5, this h4 pawn is now weak to something like this. Probably not really possible for black to defend it. He might just lose the pawn immediately with rook e4 and rook into h4. I think this was on Ding's mind, and thus he felt like h into g4 is a better way to go about it. White just captures f into g4, and now we know the ideas. This probably is going to come on the board, but let's see what happened. Bishop h4, temporary relief there. This is a nice move by Ding. Now this opens up some possibilities of trying for some queen exchange. But at least after g5, here we see that he played g6 and things started really falling apart. Black needed to take care of the position with rook e8. This is an engine line, but it's not very easy to play it nevertheless for black. If rook e4, then you can go with queen f2 and try to exchange the queens. After g6, white just took care of anything to do with queen f2, nothing doing there. And after king g7, just queen g2, and now the point is queen g4 is a very strong idea here, maybe even queen h3. But black is having difficulties with his bishop now, because after bishop h4, which was seemingly a good move a while ago, now is being a problem because that bishop can now be trapped in h4. Not very something that you want to face here again. After rook h8 came queen g4, and now you have opened up other ideas like rook into f7, queen e6 is in the air here, and that could really finish things off. What happens next is black takes care of it temporarily with queen c7. So now rook into f7 does work, but was not experimented by Magnus, because I mean it's really unnecessary. If you have a simple win with rook f3 here like Magnus did with rook f1, this does give black some chances, but it's the more human approach here. I think Magnus could do better with rook into f7, queen e6 check, and this time there is no knight on c5, so queen e6 is possible. King g7, and here we had another strong move with knight e7. Although there may be other moves that could also win here. If you have something that you find, then you can definitely post it in the comment section below. We'll have a look at it. Like, I think this is quite strong with rook f1 and queen into g6 ideas here. And if you go to see if black captures queen into c4, I think queen into g6 should lead to a mate here. King f8 and knight f5. But you can see that already black is a rook and a knight up. A rook and a bishop up, a rook and a bishop up here. So it's something that not immediate mate, it's not a direct mate, and it's something where white can easily go wrong. So you could always miss something. So rightly so, Magnus did not take any chances and went for the simpler rook f3, which is understandable with the idea of rook f1. And here black went completely wrong with f5. This was a desperate attempt because probably they're low on time, and Ding was under the impression that after rook f1, rook h3, the bishop itself is getting trapped here. It'll be difficult to defend it. But the better move was rook f8, and white plays rook f1, and black can try this move knight b6, intermediary attacking this bishop. You can take care of it, and then queen d7 just in time here. So f7 is protected, and rook h3 now not a problem. This would have been a better way for black to continue, although white will still keep his pressure on the board with queen g1 and make life difficult for black here. So let's just get back to the game and see what happened after f5, because after this things started getting very spicy. G into f6, knight into f6, and queen g2, and we can see a lot of threats looming on the board here. Queen d7 on the board, and then comes rook g1 attacking g6, very simple. Rook h6 and then a3. Now this is the kind of move which you do in situations where you're not really sure of what is the best way to win, or let's say it's just like a waiting move in the game. Although maybe bishop queen c2 was one of the moves, or I think bishop d3 would be met with e4, but it still leads to some interesting ideas here with e into d3, rook into h4, queen into g6. And a lot of things happening. This is very common in Sicilian, by the way. We have a mate in 3 here with rook g8, queen into g8, and queen e7, which is an immediate mate. But I'm sure that again you're risking some things here. So maybe Magnus, he was slightly low on time than Ding here, so he just played a3, and he still has those ideas on the board here. Knight h5. This was met with rook b3, and we can see that he's shifting his direction to the other side of the board now, trying to expand there. He thinks that maybe the attack is not strong enough, so he shifts his direction to the other side. Knight f4 and queen c2, once again keeping pressure here, planning rook b6 probably. King h8, king a2, just safeguarding the king and not allowing the immediate exchange of the queens with queen f5. It could be annoying. Black could get some counterplay. So queen f5 and he moves the queen. So it doesn't want to immediately exchange the queens. That is what we learn from here. Queen e4, rook c1, bishop g5 and rook c3. Now this was a little bit interesting because this allowed Ding something to get back in the game. I think the better move was rook g3 attacking the bishop, and if black comes back with g4, you can actually, find something interesting here and ignore this, because if you see, white could actually go for this killer move which is possible here, which is queen b4. Once again, this was engine suggestion at the time, but I'm not entirely sure if it works out very well. But after bishop g3, if you try knight d3, white has bishop into d3, and black unfortunately cannot capture queen into d5 in time because of queen c4 taking care of everything here. Both the pieces are defended. And if you go queen into d3, queen into d6 is making things very difficult here for black, because there are too many possibilities and the exchange may not work out too well for you. So a lot of interesting things happening. But in the game, we see that rook c3 was played, and this allowed Ding to get back with knight e6 and shift his knight to c5 just in time. The knight was belonging here because the rook is now focusing on the other side of the board, and that's exactly what Ding did. Queen c2, and now white has to force an exchange. But we'll see what happened though. Knight d4 was chosen by Ding. Knight c5 actually was a slightly better choice, but given the circumstances of the position, given the time both of them had on the clock, knight d4 seems like a more logical choice, because once white captures knight d4, ed4, you get a pass pawn to play with, and there's upper color bishops. We know already the opposite color bishops are a good situation to hold a draw. But what happened is, after this Magnus, it was much easier for Magnus to play now, because he's the one who is going to take control of the board, and black is going to try his best to defend it. Bishop f4, rook into a6, rook into a6, bishop into a6, and rook h3 played out by Ding, and things started falling apart here because these pawns are too dangerous. And I think Ding realized that rook into h2 would just not be enough here, because after rook into h2, there are too many hurdles along the way here between the bishop reaching the square and covering these two pawns. The king is also pretty far away on the other side of the board, and these two pawns are on the way. They are on the way, and something like g5, let's just have a look. I play bishop f1 covering this, and if you play g3, I'm in a6 and I'm queening faster there. So let's say bishop tries to join in the attack here with bishop g1. I still can play a6, or I can even play b4, b3 and just capture it and then cover this, and the king will be along the way, and these pawns are just promoting there. Let's say black tries with g3. All white needs to do is probably just get king b3, and black eventually will need to sacrifice this because the bishop needs to cover the a7 square. King c3, you can capture this, and then once again these pawns are just too strong to be stopped. So Ding realized this and maybe look at d3. Actually d3 is the main idea here, and a4 was not followed by d3 though, which I think was the better move. Rook c3 would be met with king g7. d2 would unfortunately run to a check, so that's why he took, like, d3 would not be possible, but you have to meet it with king g7. And okay, rook into d3 would be met with rook into h2, and maybe some possibilities here for black, some ideas up his sleeve. But Ding chose king g7 over it, and this was met with a good rook f2 by white, an intermediary move again, but nice precise play here by Magnus, even though he was low on time, because now if you push a5 d3, you cannot really play rook c3 because of d2, and you cannot capture this with a check on h3. That would be a problem. So this was met with rook f2 and bishop e3, bishop f1. Another very nice move here by Magnus, because you could play rook e2 also, but bishop f1, this temporarily keeps the king cut off, and as we know, bishop into f2 and these pawns are quite strong, so black cannot really afford to exchange off the rooks of the board. So after bishop f1, he went rook h5. White took care of it, rook g2. So what he has gained by this, d3 no longer possible immediately. Now white is not too worried about this pawn, as we will see. Rook into d5 was met with bishop d3, stopping d3 once again, putting pressure on g6. Rook g5, and this was a fatal blunder. The only way black can keep play going is something with g5 or with rook a5 temporary in between. White can push king a3, and then something with bishop c1 was needed, which is engine's choice. But this position is just falling apart, because after b4 this is very difficult to stop. These two pawns are way too difficult to stop here. Black has no pawn which is actually progressing further also. So rook g5, and after rook into g5, bishop g5, white just pushed his pawns along, and once again two pawns in the way are going to get in the way of the bishop trying to get there. Bishop d8 and a6 was played fearlessly by Magnus. Generally, you want to push b4 here, keeping the pawns intact and keep as many pawns under dark squares so that black does not get an idea to set up a fortress. Like after a6, bishop b6, let's assume this king was on a7, that would be very well a fortress, because the king, it is very difficult for us to progress after that. But in this case, after bishop b6, the king is coming, not the pawn. That would be a mistake. The king, if it reaches in time to a7, then maybe black may be able to hold a fortress if he's lucky. So king b3, and the king is going to come all the way, and that was Magnus' idea. Black resigned here immediately. Didn't realize that, okay, this is just too fast, and he resigned. But if black tries king f4 and tries to fight in this race, the problem is, let's say you have to move bishop c5, and white, instead of going a7 here, which is also winning by the way, like bishop into g6, d3, and you can just play this, cover this square, and this pawn is on its way. Black will take too much time to queen, but you can show a little bit of finesse and finish this position right here with b4. And that's it. That's a beautiful shot. Again, the bishop is out of squares. He captures and the pawn just promotes there. So we saw a very nice game there. Very good technique by Magnus. Although there were some mishaps here and there. It's a blitz game, so you cannot really play perfect chess. But the idea and the technique followed by Magnus was very nice and very instructive. So he gets the second game. Let's see what he does in the third game. And I will see you soon in the next one. If you did enjoy this video, then definitely like it, subscribe to our channel, hit the bell icon to stay updated, and see you soon. Goodbye.